Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take sources you're interested in and, well, dive deep to pull out the key stuff.
That's the plan.
Today, we're getting into something really fascinating, how we actually think, how we make decisions. We're drawing on Daniel Kahneman's big one, thinking fast and slow.
Right. A classic. And the goal really is to give you the core ideas without you having to wade through, hundreds of pages.
Exactly. We know you want to grasp these powerful concepts quickly, see how they work.
So that's what we'll do. Navigate the essentials so you can see the connections to your own experience.
Okay, so to make sense of it all, we're going to focus on three main distinctions Kahneman makes. First up, the two selves.
Ah, yes, the experiencing self versus the remembering self.
Then second, this idea of two species, the super-rational econs versus, well, us, humans.
Humans, yeah, with all our quirks.
And finally, the two systems driving our thought processes. System one, the fast, intuitive one.
And system two, the slower, more effortful one.
Understanding these three pairs should give us a really solid framework for thinking about judgment, choice, and even like our own happiness.
Definitely. So let's start with those two selves. You have the experiencing self, that's the one living life in the moment, feeling things right now.
And the remembering self.
That's the one looking back, keeping score, telling the story, and crucially, making the decisions about the future.
Okay, and this is where that cold hand study comes in, right? It's kind of wild.
It really is. So people put their hand in painfully cold water. In one condition, it's just, say, 60 seconds of intense cold. In another, it's the same 60 seconds plus another 30 seconds where the water warms up just slightly. Still unpleasant, but less so.
So more total time in the cold water in the second case. Objectively worse, you'd think?
Objectively more total discomfort, yes. But when asked which trial they'd prefer to repeat, many chose the longer one.
Because the ending was slightly less awful.
Precisely. This shows two key things about the remembering self. First, duration neglect. The length of the unpleasantness didn't matter as much as you expect.
Okay.
And second, the peak end rule. The memory was dominated by the worst moment, the peak, and how it felt right at the very end. A less painful end made the whole memory seem better, even though the experience involved more total pain.
That seems almost irrational from the perspective of the experiencing self. You're choosing more suffering.
From the experiencing self's point of view, it is a mistake. But the remembering self calls the shots based on the story it constructs, not the moment-to-moment reality. And this isn't just about pain.
Right, you could see it in, like, judging a whole vacation by the Fantastic last night, ignoring maybe 3 days of rain.
Exactly. Or even evaluating a whole life based on its final chapter.
Yeah.
Our memory plays tricks.
So the remembering self, it's kind of constructed by our more deliberate system too, but it's using these biased memories supplied by the quick, automatic system one.
That's a great way to put it. System 2 knows duration should matter logically, more pain is worse. But it relied on System 1's memory, which tells it duration doesn't matter that much, and the ending is key. This leads to, well, flawed choices sometimes.
Like maybe preferring a short, intense holiday over a longer, more relaxed one, even if the total pleasure might be higher in the second.
Could be. Or tolerating a really long, mildly annoying meeting if you know there are donuts at the end. That whole don't do it, you'll regret it warning, that's the remembering self predicting its future judgment.
But that judgment isn't always aligned with maximizing actual lived happiness.
Not necessarily. Which brings up this alternative idea, a duration-weighted view of well-being. Basically, every moment counts equally.
Unless
a moment is particularly memorable, maybe you dwell on it a lot, or it has knock-on effects like, say, practicing an instrument leads to future enjoyment, or a trauma leads to ongoing distress. But you can only really weigh that memorability or impact afterwards.
it makes logical sense valuing all moments. But, I mean, we do identify with our remembering self, don't we? We care about our life story.
Absolutely. We are our stories in many ways. So any decent theory of well-being has to grapple with both selves, the experiencing and the remembering. Their interests don't always line up, and that's a real challenge, philosophically and practically.
And for policy, thinking about healthcare or welfare.
Big implications. How do we decide which medical conditions get the most resources? Do we base it on how much people fear a condition, or the actual day-to-day suffering it causes, the experiencing self's view? Or how much people desire relief, the remembering self's focus?
Yeah, like would blindness rank higher based on fear, but maybe chronic pain rank higher based on constant suffering?
It's possible the rankings would change depending on the measure. It's complex. But there's definitely a growing interest in trying to measure well-being, maybe even creating a sort of national index of suffering to guide policy beyond just GDP.
Okay, fascinating stuff. Let's shift to the second distinction. Econs versus humans.
Right. So in everyday language, rational usually means something like sensible or reasonable.
Makes sense. Logical.
But in economics, especially the traditional rational choice models, rationality means something much stricter and maybe less intuitive. It just means internal consistency.
Internal consistency, meaning
Meaning your beliefs and preferences don't contradict each other. And econ, this theoretical rational being, could believe ghosts are real or prefer being poor to being rich and still be perfectly rational in this economic sense, as long as all their other choices and beliefs line up logically with those starting points.
so it's not about whether the beliefs are true or the preferences sensible, just whether they're consistent.
Exactly. And econs, by this definition, wouldn't be swayed by things that affect us humans, like how options are framed or what they just saw flashing on a screen or focusing too narrowly on one aspect of a problem. They wouldn't show preference reversals just because the question was asked differently.
Which, let's be honest, we humans do all the time.
We do. But it's important, as Kahneman points out, not to leap to calling humans irrational in the everyday sense, like they're just crazy or incapable of reason. It's just that the strict rational agent model of the econ isn't a very good description of how people actually operate.
Got it. And this econ assumption, this idea of perfect rationality, it's had a big influence on policy debates, hasn't it? Especially libertarian ideas.
Very much so. Thinkers from the Chicago School of Economics, like Milton Friedman, often drew a line from assuming people are rational actors to advocating for minimal government interference. The logic is, if people are rational, they know what's best for themselves.
So let them choose freely. Laissez-faire.
Right. The government shouldn't intervene unless someone's choice directly harms others. This perspective often comes with a deep faith in the efficiency of markets to coordinate these rational choices. You even see attempts to explain things like drug addiction using a rational addiction framework, arguing addicts are weighing future consequences, however grim.
Wow. Okay. The idea being look for the rational calculation first before assuming it's just psychology.
That's the approach. So, from this viewpoint, mandating motorcycle helmets or forcing people to save for retirement is seen as paternalistic interference with rational individuals making their own trade-offs.
Yeah.
They know the risks, they make the choice, they bear the consequences.
But behavioral economics comes along and says, hang on.
Exactly. Behavioral economics, drawing on psychology, says, well, actually, freedom isn't free. Humans make predictable mistakes, thanks to these cognitive biases we've been talking about. Our choices aren't always in our own best interests.
Which creates a tricky situation, right? If people do make mistakes, when is it okay or even necessary to step in and help them avoid those mistakes?
That's the dilemma for behavioral economists. It's a problem the pure rational agent model avoids because, by definition, econs don't make systematic errors.
This leads us to nudge, right? Thaler and Sunstein's idea. Libertarian paternalism.
Precisely. It tries to square the circle. The goal is to help people make better decisions. Decisions they themselves would likely prefer if they had an infinite time and attention, but without restricting their freedom to choose otherwise.
Like the automatic enrollment in pension plans?
Perfect example. The default is you're enrolled. That's the nudge towards saving. But you could easily choose to opt out. It uses our inertia, our tendency to stick with the default for our own good.
Because we humans, unlike those perfect econs, can be nudged, and sometimes we need protection from companies maybe trying to exploit our System 1 shortcuts or our System 2 laziness.
That's the idea. An econ reads every word of the fine print. A human scrolls past. The old rational model might say, just disclosing information is enough, no matter how complex.
But nudge says make the disclosure simple, make the better choice easy.
Right. Make contracts understandable, which, interestingly, some firms resist, maybe because complexity benefits them if customers don't fully grasp the deal. They might prefer competing on obfuscation rather than just product quality.
And this libertarian paternalism, it's found surprisingly broad support.
It has. Take the Save More Tomorrow plan, where your savings contribution goes up automatically with pay rises, but you can always opt out. It got backing from across the political spectrum. It works psychologically because you don't feel the loss immediately. It frames the saving as a foregone gain rather than a current loss. And it uses System 2's inertia to help achieve long-term goals.
And we've seen these ideas implemented.
Oh yeah, in the UK, the US, other places. The UK government even set up a behavioral insights team. often called the nudge unit. Sunstein worked in the Obama administration promoting these ideas.
So things like clearer fuel efficiency labels, automatic health insurance enrollment options, even the simple food plate replacing the confusing food pyramid.
All examples of trying to gently steer humans towards better choices using insights about how we actually think without forcing anyone's hand. Informed, unintrusive help.
Okay, makes sense. Let's tackle the third pair. The two systems, System 1 and System 2.
Right. And just to reiterate, these aren't like actual locations in the brain. They're more like characters in a play, representing different modes of thinking. System 1 is the fast, automatic, intuitive stuff.
Effortless, like recognizing a friend or driving on an empty road.
Exactly. System 2 is the slow, effortful, deliberate thinking. The stuff that requires concentration.
Like doing a complex math problem or consciously choosing what to say in a delicate situation.
Right. So when we say System 1 does this or System 2 decides that, it's just shorthand for these different kinds of mental processes.
And System 2, that's kind of who we think we are, right? The conscious reasoning self making choices.
That's how it feels, certainly. It's the voice in our head. But, crucially, System 2 often ends up endorsing or rationalizing the feelings, intuitions, and impulses that bubble up from System 1.
So System 1 generates a suggestion, maybe a gut feeling.
And System 2 often just goes along with it, maybe constructing a plausible-sounding reason after the fact, even if the initial impulse came from somewhere less rational, like an unconscious bias or a misleading association.
But System 2 isn't just a follower, is it? It does step in sometimes.
Absolutely. It's crucial. System 2 is what allows us to override stupid impulses, follow rules, make complex comparisons, and focus our attention. Attention is key. When System 2 is engaged, we generally perform better on tasks requiring careful thought.
But it's not perfect either. It has limits.
Definitely. Gets tired, it can be lazy, and it only works with the information it has, which might be incomplete or biased by System 1 already. It's not a paragon of pure rationality.
Now, the book, Thinking Fast and Slow, spends a lot of time on the errors caused by System 1, the biases.
Understandably so, because they're fascinating and have real consequences. But it's vital to remember that System 1 is also the source of almost everything we do right.
Like what?
Well, our basic understanding of the world, recognizing objects, understanding language, knowing that dogs bark and cats meow, distinguishing the surprising from the normal, and all our acquired skills. Expert intuition is largely System 1 at work.
Ah, okay. So skills like playing chess or being a doctor.
Exactly. Developing expertise requires a predictable environment, lots of practice, and quick, clear feedback. When you have that, your System 1 learns the patterns, and you can make fast, accurate, intuitive judgments. Skilled performers can process huge amounts of information almost instantly. That's System 1 honed through experience.
But what if you face a problem where you don't have that skilled intuition? Like, say, calculating 17 times 24.
Right. No one has an instant intuition for that. System 2 has to grind it out. But often, for complex judgments where we lack expertise, System 1 jumps into the shortcut. It substitutes an easier question for the hard one.
The heuristic again.
The heuristic, yes.
Yeah.
So instead of asking, how happy will I be if I move to California, which is hard, System 1 might answer the easier question, how do I feel about sunshine and beaches right now? It gives you an answer that feels right, it's accessible, but it might not actually answer the important question accurately.
And the problem is, System 1 feels confident about these shortcut answers.
That's the real kicker. System 1 delivers answers with a sense of cognitive ease, a feeling of rightness, whether they come from genuine skill or a potentially flawed heuristic. It doesn't warn you.
And System 2.
System 2 often just lazily endorses it. It takes effort to check System 1's work. Think about that bat and ball problem. The intuitive answer, 1 pound and 10p, feels right, and System 2 often doesn't bother doing the simple math to see it's wrong, 1 pound of 5 and 5p.
So this is why System 1 gets the blame for biases like WYSIAD. What you see is all there is, or anchoring or overconfidence.
Exactly. System 1 works with the information immediately available, creates coherent stories, matches intensity across different scales, all very useful usually, but prone to error in specific situations.
So the big question, how do we fight these biases if System 1 is so automatic and System 2 is kind of lazy?
Well, Kahneman is somewhat pessimistic about retraining System 1 directly. He admits that even after studying this stuff for decades, his own intuitive thinking didn't radically improve. He got better at recognizing situations prone to bias, though.
Spotting the cognitive minefields.
Yeah, exactly. Like recognizing you might be anchored by an initial number, or that you might be making a decision based only on easily recalled examples. The strategy is recognize the danger zone, deliberately slow down, and engage system 2.
Like with the Miller-Lyer illusion, the lines that look different lengths but aren't, once you know it's an illusion, you don't trust your eyes in that specific case.
Right. You learn to distrust your intuition in that specific situation. The problem is, cognitive illusions don't usually come with labels, and it's hardest to slow down and think carefully when we're stressed or rushed, precisely when biases might be strongest. The voice of System 2 reason can be pretty quiet sometimes.
And it's easier to spot these biases in others.
Much easier. We're better critics of others' thinking than our own, which points towards solutions at the organizational level. Organizations can be better than individuals at avoiding errors because they can implement procedures that force slower, more deliberate thinking. Things like checklists, requiring formal forecasts that consider outside statistics, reference class forecasting, or doing a pre-mortem, imagining a project has failed and asking why.
Building System 2 checks into the process.
Yes, and fostering a culture where it's okay to question assumptions. Having a shared language, being able to say, hang on, are we falling prey to anchoring here, or is this maybe narrow framing, makes constructive criticism much easier and more effective.
Thinking of the organization like a factory that produces judgments and decisions.
You need quality control at each step. How is the problem framed? How is information gathered? Is there time for reflection and review? It's better to have routine checks than big inquiries after a disaster. It's amazing how little systematic training most places provide on just running effective meetings that avoid common thinking traps.
So developing this richer language for talking about thinking isn't just academic.
Not at all. It's intensely practical. Identifying a judgment error, precisely calling it anchoring or availability bias, is like a doctor diagnosing an illness. It suggests causes, effects, and potential remedies.
And better gossip at the water cooler leads to better decisions.
In a way, yes. Decision makers are often more sensitive to what they imagine their colleagues will say later than to their own doubts right now. If they anticipate sophisticated, fair criticism focused on the process of their decision, not just whether it luckily turned out okay, they're more likely to put in the System 2 effort to make a better choice in the first place.
Okay, that's a really powerful point. So let's try and wrap this deep dive up.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. We looked at the two selves, experiencing versus remembering, and how that disconnect shapes our choices and our view of well-being.
Then the Econs versus Humans distinction, highlighting the limits of pure rationality models and the implications for policy, leading into ideas like nudging.
And finally, the constant interplay between the automatic, intuitive System 1 and the effortful, analytical System 2, exploring where errors come from and how we might possibly mitigate them.
Hopefully understanding these frameworks gives you some really useful tools for looking at your own judgments, your own decisions.
And maybe understanding the world and the choices other people make a little bit better, too.
So maybe a final thought to leave you with.
Yeah.
Think about some of your own strongly remembered experiences. How might you evaluate them differently if your experiencing self, the one living through it moment by moment, had a louder voice in the retelling?
Yeah, and how does knowing about the gap between theoretical econs and real humans change how you look at the rules, the systems, the policies that shape our lives every day? Something to chew on.